Madam Chair. Let me start by thanking colleagues at SIGA, notably Director Sibokazi. I think she's outside. Vanessa, who's been really helpful with all the logistics, and Adrian, I think you remain one of our unsung heroes. Excellent coordination and photography. I must give you that credit. And you're the why not? The epitome of the non-paparazzi. You don't behave like a paparazzi, which is. I think we should not underestimate the importance of these types of events, these dialogues where we sit together and think about issues relating to us. There are very few opportunities, as Africans, for us to sit and actually engage with ideas and issues. And one hopes that some of the ideas that we develop, come up with, shape, will be able to contribute to remolding our continent, because this is the theme from the very beginning. How do we actually bring about the change that is necessary, given Wafula's very Afro-pessimistic rendition from an Afro-optimist, though. I think he did say that he was an Afro-optimist. So we have to give him that credit, that he's able to see the other side, but also visualize and have the vision of a future Africa. We do have a chicken and egg situation where, as Wafula said, AU member states are not really supporting the Union, the African Union, and then in turn the AU has not yet generated enough buy-in from across the continent that it should be supported. And even African citizens, the majority of them, in fact, don't know that the African Union exists. This, unfortunately, is still a debate that is happening very much at the level of, I want to say, elites, intellectual elites, political elites, civil society, so on and so forth. And so we really have to work quite hard to use forums like this to generate ideas concretely and then project them out to the wider society and make sure we have an inclusive, dialogue and we speak the truth when we do so. I think Professor Edna was complaining that she doesn't like South African funerals because they tend to happen very, very quickly. I'm going to try to replicate the funeral experience by actually going through this very, very quickly. I know we are in the graveyard shift, so my role might be to bury the day's discussion. But look, I think to keep you awake, the PowerPoint is available. If you speak nicely to Adrian, he will obviously give you a copy. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, actually. So you might see me flying through, but this is the structure and the kind of what I'm going to try and speak about. What would be the goals? And the title of the discussion is the role of the African Governance Platform on monitoring governance in Africa. If you read the concept note for this event, this dialogue, you would find references to the African governance architecture, and the governance architecture is to be implemented by the African Governance Platform. But we shall get to that as we go through it. And I think that was a very useful concept note that you provided us with, so we were able to kind of build upon that. So guiding principles, you can even get to the stage of what sort of indicators you can look at, the monitoring governance, methodology, institutional framework, reporting, and implementation is where we seem to always be quite weak. But this all kind of emerges from the establishment. Now, this African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, this is a very important document, ladies and gentlemen. If you use this to essentially challenge your government, majority of them have signed up to this. Now a total of 19 have ratified. So this is a legal document. It's alive. And so we can actually make references to it. And we can say, why are you not upholding the provisions of this document? And you can download it quite easily online. Obviously, Google, I think, is still quite dominant. You can get your copy and actually use it to engage in advocacy, teaching, analysis, research, so on and so forth. So this is a document that, in a sense, has informed the establishment of the African governance architecture, which has led to the establishment of the platform, which I'll talk about very briefly, But the specific article within this document is 44.1, item 1, states committing themselves to implement the objectives and principles enshrined in this charter, and the development of benchmarks. So there's some kind of a monitoring element included in this document, which is essentially where then my presentation is coming from. The need for RECs to cooperate. I think Dr. Frank gave us a very good presentation on the challenges of coordination, evaluation, monitoring, and the very strong case for as wide as possible stakeholder inclusion, civil society organizations taking part in this as much as possible. Now, within this charter, there is reference to a central coordinating mechanism, which essentially is the Department of Political Affairs at the African Union. And within the Department of Political Affairs, you have in existence the African Governance Platform. I'll say a little bit more of that as we go along. And the objective of that provision within the Charter is to push for greater coordination and evaluation. But it's not the Department of Political Affairs that's solely responsible for this. Governance, as you know, really is, you're talking about the entire continent, 1 billion people, all the countries, and therefore also all of the different institutions of the African Union that work on governance. I'm thinking the Pan-African Parliament, Peace and Security Council has been mentioned, African Human Rights Commission, Court of Justice, Economic and Social, Cultural and Social Rights Council, RECs, and also at the national level. Necessary structures need to be set up at the national level to ensure there's coordination, at least uptake and awareness of the existence of this charter and how it can be implemented. Concretely, Article 49.1 speaks of the need for every 2 years for there to be some form of a report about the state of governance in Africa. And if you take that further, 49.2 requires a report to be submitted to all of the organs I've just mentioned of the African Union for action within their specific mandate. So Parliament will deal with what it has to deal with, Peace and Security Council, so on and so forth. Article 49.3 requires the Commission of the African Union, then the Department of Political Affairs, to in fact prepare and submit to the Assembly a synthesized report of the state of governance in Africa. So this is already embedded within this charter, if you will, a governance monitoring mechanism. The challenge is it has not been in fact articulated. It was not articulated when this charter was officially signed. So the challenge then for the AU, and the AU is quite good at actually doing this, is coming up with modalities and additional protocols and new structures. AU is quite brilliant at creating things. But as Frank said, if a beggar creates, or a beggar gives birth to a child and refuses to look after the child, puts it up for adoption, then you have a problem. The challenge here is to make sure we don't let these institutions and these charters, if you will, kind of just rot away, ossify and die. Because we need them. We really need them to change the situation that has been described this morning in our discussions. So we fast forward to 2011 when the AU governance, the AU Assembly of Heads of State established the governance platform within what is broadly understood as the African governance architecture, which is referred to in the concept note. And the idea of the platform is to in fact implement and operationalize that architecture. We go to June last year, 2012, when the platform was officially launched in Lusaka, and the idea is that it will be serviced by the Department of Political Affairs in Addis Ababa. Its objectives is to facilitate information flows, exchange dialogue, synergies, joint action between African governments and civil society, RECs, so on and so forth. The summit, 16th summit of the AU, put a very specific request to the Commission. Executive Council of Ministers told the commissioners to in fact make sure they begin to work on putting in place periodic reviews and coordinating the monitoring of compliance with instruments of the African Union in this broad category called shared values. Within shared values includes this African Charter on democracy, elections and governance. So we have, if you will, the political mandate to put in place a governance monitoring framework. That's already there, and in fact this work is unfolding and ongoing as we speak. What are its objectives? Clearly monitoring and evaluation. Benchmarking is a word that's actually used in the Charter itself. Benchmarking, very briefly, is defining a standard upon which, to gauge the progress, of member states in achieving that standard. Obviously, to do that, you will need to establish a baseline and then have ongoing assessments as we move forward. Now, what we have within the Charter is, in fact, already a set of provisions. We have a set of provisions within the Charter which has set very high standards for African governments. Everything that's happened in Zimbabwe is in major contravention of this Charter. Everything that's happening in Madagascar is in contravention of this Charter, so on and so forth. You pick a country. Kenya 2008 also contravened this Charter. All right. So the challenge is to actually make sure that what we have on paper we can move quite robustly and concretely into implementing best practices, ideal standards, and benchmarks. So there's no, the issue of the deficit in good governance. I prefer to use the word democratic governance, so as not to just cut and paste words from the World Bank. This is a challenge we definitely have to deal with. AU member states are in completely different stages of governance, if you will, development. So it's very difficult to say this is the standard. Mauritius is our standard, and we should all aspire to be like Mauritius. Or South Africa is our standard. We should all aspire to be South Africa. Each country is starting from its own position. What we have within the Charter is, in fact, a series of provisions, as I mentioned, which every country should aspire to. That, I think, should be our goal. So the Charter has already established, if you will, benchmarks, right, for evaluating governance, which can then also be used to monitor and determine whether the member states are working towards improving their governance, right? So we have within the Charter the means to assess the progress towards governance. So there is no need as such to really establish governance monitoring indicators. We had the discussion on the APRM. APRM has done a lot of work on indicators. I think, in fact, the point was that maybe there are too many indicators. So the Charter, to a large extent, is complementing the indicators that already exist within the APRM. But I think the politics of the APRM we need to unpack a little bit. The APRM as a project has actually been stifled quite a bit. A lot of member states have refused to implement some of the very concrete recommendations proposed in there. So what happens when an idea dies at the AU? They come up with another idea. So this is the latest idea. Because the Charter was ratified, 15 countries ratified the Charter, it became a living document. Now 19 have ratified. It's increasingly becoming the in thing, the fashionable thing for us to engage with. Okay? It doesn't mean that it's going to make it all the way. It could actually end up the same way as the APRM ended up, which is, they talk about it, it's there, but they have to hardly pay any attention to it. And that's the hard fact that we have at the moment. It's actually losing steam, if you will, the APRM. So the Charter, it's up to actually African citizens, think tanks, civil society to keep pushing on this Charter, because it can very easily be sidelined by member states. As I mentioned before, they're very keen to carry on doing what they do within their countries. They don't want this continental oversight to come and, in fact, infringe on what they're doing within their countries. So, such as a system of monitoring needs to be quite simple. I think that some of the very principles we should focus on. Simple indicators should be clear. I'm not going to go extensively into some of the indicators that exist, but if you go through this document, chapter 4 to 9, you will see some of the provisions around democracy, the rule of law, human rights, culture of democracy and peace, democratic institutions, democratic elections, sanctions on cases of unconstitutional change of government, indicators relating to political, economic and social governance, and cross-cutting indicators of gender. So it's very useful to have the debate discussion before by Shuvai on gender, equality in the system. So, very quickly, methodology. Look, this is just some of my ideas, which are out there to be debated, and obviously we have to also engage the AU directly with some of these ideas. Obviously, you need a baseline. You need to figure out what you're going to do if there's non-compliance. So, for baselines of all the 54 African countries, you need national assessments. That would be an ideal way to start. You need a benchmarking process. There is no single benchmarking process, so you would rather, have a process where at least countries understand what is necessary: planning, mapping, data collection, analysis, monitoring, communication, action planning, and review. What the Charter speaks about is a report every 2 years on the state of governance in Africa. So the idea then around that would be a biannual report, right, which is stipulated in Article 49 of the Charter. In my view, if you want to do this properly, you would need to have a focal point that is quite independent-ish of the system, but still linked to it somehow. So the idea of rapporteurs, exists in the Human Rights Council, people who are independent experts who can analyze situations or themes and come and report back to the body. An AU rapporteur, special rapporteur on governance, can work very closely with the AU Commission, Department of Political Affairs, and all of the other institutions that are working on governance, to in fact compile this biannual report on governance. That obviously requires a lot of analysis, a lot of research. So there's no way this individual can work on his own or her own, to be gender sensitive, and we need to work with partner organizations like SIGLA, like the Levi Mwanawasa Center, like all the other organizations that are represented here today. I think the policy brief series speaks for itself. If you have a charter that exists, you need to analyze what are the policy challenges around the existence of such a charter. The institutional framework I've already kind of mentioned. The platform exists, the central coordinating mechanism, the DPA. National platforms that are focused on raising awareness about this charter, I think, would be crucial. The APRM process also has national coordinating, if you will, mechanisms. If this charter is going to become a living document in the lives of African people, it needs national organization, national platforms to actually drive the process forward. The ultimate objective in terms of reporting, as I mentioned, a biannual report, which you can either call a synthesized governance report from all of the 54 national platforms. If you're going to pull this off, the rapporteur cannot work on their own. Clearly, you would need, therefore, a network of independent governance experts, some of who could be in this very room as we speak. They have to work closely with the permanent representatives, the ambassadors in Addis Ababa, and obviously then report to the Executive Council of Ministers, who can feed this up directly to the heads of state for approval or scowling and growling and ultimately, shelving the report. But we don't want to get there. We want to get to a stage where these reports become part of the governance monitoring process and system. So implementation is crucial. Article 46 of the Charter, needs that, speaks to the need for measures that can be taken if member states violate the Charter. So there is this enforcement dimension. There's a compliance enforcement dimension. But we should not only focus on enforcement, we should look at compliance assistance, how we can help countries that need to improve their democratic governance. Again, partnerships, networks, RECs, working with civil society, working with government, to ensure that states that need assistance in improving their democratic governance systems, electoral institutions, so on and so forth, can be assisted through advisory missions from the African Union. So that's, if you will, my initial thoughts about what the role of the African governance platform could be, in fact, in helping to promote governance monitoring in Africa. As I said, some of this work is actually ongoing as we speak. The Department of Political Affairs is involved in convening quite a number of civil society stakeholder meetings, think tank type of engagement on these issues, and so it's still a moment of fluidity, where some of these ideas could still percolate up into the system. There is a danger of creating too many new institutions when we already have almost, you don't have a shortage of institutions at the AU. You have a problem in implementation. But what I'm talking about here is implementation. If you don't have a mechanism to promote implementation, then you are, in fact, pretty much just singing and sailing in the wind and so on and so forth. So this is pretty much what I think we need to be trying to push towards. I think some of that ideas will not fly at the AU, quite frankly, because of if we understand the political mindset of our political leaders, they would not want something that's quite robust in monitoring them. You know what I mean? So, but there's no harm in trying. I think that's my approach to life. And let's see how we end up. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.